Good afternoon, dear friends. I am Evely, and today I will tell you a true story. Enjoy your viewing. The crypt beneath the old Carrington estate had been sealed for centuries. It was rumored to house the restless spirit of a nobleman whose name was stricken from the annals of history. The estate itself, a decaying Gothic manor perched on the edge of a jagged cliff, had been abandoned since the late 1700s. Local villagers spoke in hushed tones about strange lights that flickered in its broken windows and shadows that danced without light sources. Nobody dared approach, until the night the crypt was accidentally unearthed. The excavation crew wasn't searching for a crypt. They were part of a government project to stabilize the land around the cliff. The foreman, a skeptical man named Arnold Greaves, dismissed the locals' warnings as superstitious nonsense. It was his drill that first broke through the crypt's ancient stone seal. The air that rushed out was colder than winter's breath and carried with it an unsettling metallic scent. Deep inside the crypt, the workers found a coffin engraved with intricate symbols none of them could recognize. The coffin was made of a blackened metal, cold to the touch even in the sweltering summer air. It was bound with chains, their locks rusted but unbroken. Against his better judgment, Arnold decided to force it open. Inside lay the body of a man. He was unervingly well-preserved, his flesh pale but intact, his black hair flowing like liquid shadow. His right hand was clasped tightly over his chest, gripping a silver dagger plunged directly into his heart. Around him lay scattered relics, a mirror tarnished beyond reflection, an hourglass filled with what looked like ground bone, and several leather-bound tomes in a language no one could read. The moment the dagger was removed, chaos began. The first to die was Arnold. As he held the dagger aloft, its blade gleaming unnaturally in the dim light, the figure in the coffin opened its eyes. They were a deep, unearthly red, glowing like twin furnaces. Arnold's body convulsed as his blood seemed to boil within him. He collapsed, his veins blackened, his mouth frozen in a silent scream. The creature rose slowly, its movements fluid and predatory. Its right hand twitched, the fingers curling into an almost delicate fist before flexing open. The workers, paralyzed by fear, could only watch as it turned its gaze upon them. "You have freed me," it said, its voice a symphony of whispers and echoes. "And now the debt must be paid." What followed was a massacre. The vampire moved with inhuman speed, its right hand ripping through flesh and bone as though they were paper. One by one, the workers fell, their blood painting the crypt's walls. Yet, as horrifying as the deaths were, they were not the end. The bodies rose again, their eyes lifeless and their faces contorted in agony. They moved like puppets, their jerky movements controlled by some unseen force. They turned to the village, drawn by the vampire's will. The village of Carrington Hollow was plunged into chaos. At first, the strange occurrences seemed random. Livestock was found drained of blood, their bodies left in unervingly pristine condition. Children began waking in the night, claiming to see a man with glowing red eyes standing at their windows. As days turned into nights, the reports grew more sinister. Entire families disappeared, their homes eerily untouched save for the pools of blood left behind. Mara, a young schoolteacher, was among the first to understand the pattern. She had always been fascinated by local folklore and remembered the legends of the right-handed vampire, an ancient creature cursed to wield its dark powers through its dominant hand. It was said that this particular vampire had been sealed away by a coalition of witches, priests, and scholars after it ravaged an entire kingdom. Desperate to save her village, Mara sought the help of Father Donahue, the elderly priest who tended the local church. Together, they ventured into the church's archives, searching for any mention of how the vampire might be defeated. Their efforts yielded a single clue. The vampire's right hand was both its source of power and its greatest vulnerability. If severed and burned with consecrated fire, the creature could be banished. Meanwhile, the vampire's influence spread. The villagers found themselves trapped in nightmarish situations with no hope of escape. In one instance, a group of hunters attempted to flee to the neighboring town. As their carriage sped through the forest, the horses suddenly reared back, their eyes rolling with terror. The hunters saw him then, standing in the middle of the road, his crimson gaze locking onto theirs. The vampire raised his right hand, and the hunters' bodies twisted grotesquely, their bones snapping as they were pulled into the woods by an invisible force. Days later, their bloodless corpses were found hanging from the trees, arranged like grotesque marionettes. In another instance, an elderly couple barricaded themselves inside their home. They prayed fervently, clutching rosaries as the vampire's thralls clawed at their doors. Hours passed and the pounding stopped. The silence was short-lived. A chill filled the room, and when they turned, they found the vampire standing behind them. He raised his right hand, and their breaths were stolen from their lungs. The couple died clutching one another, their faces frozen in expressions of pure terror. Mara and Father Donahue's plan was fraught with peril. To sever the vampire's hand, they would need to lure it into the open, a nearly impossible task given its power. Worse, they needed to perform the ritual in the churchyard, where the consecrated fire could be prepared. Their opportunity came when the vampire attacked the church itself. It sought to eliminate the one sanctuary in the village it could not penetrate. Mara stood in the nave, trembling as the vampire approached. Its red eyes bore into hers, and its right hand reached out, the air around it shimmering with dark energy. Before the vampire could strike, Father Donahue appeared from the shadows, wielding the silver dagger that had once imprisoned the creature. He drove it into the vampire's shoulder, forcing it to recoil. With a guttural growl, the vampire turned its attention to him, giving Mara the moment she needed. The battle in the churchyard was fierce. The vampire's thralls swarmed the area, their unnatural strength nearly overwhelming the villagers who had joined the fight. Mara managed to light the consecrated fire, its golden flames casting long shadows across the graves. As the vampire stepped into the yard, the flames flickered, their light dimming under the weight of its presence. It raised its right hand, and the ground beneath it cracked, tendrils of black smoke curling upward. Mara and Father Donahue stood side by side, their resolve unshaken despite the hopeless odds. They knew that only one of them would have the chance to sever the hand, and that survival was unlikely. The vampire advanced, its crimson eyes locking onto Mara and Father Donahue. The air seemed to thicken with every step it took, suffocating and heavy with malice. Around the churchyard, the vampire's thralls lurched forward, their jagged movements accompanied by sickening snaps of bone and the grotesque squelch of sinew. Mara gripped the silver dagger in one hand and a small vial of holy water in the other. Father Donahue, armed only with a heavy crucifix, whispered prayers under his breath, though his voice trembled with fear. "You think to challenge me?" the vampire sneered, its voice slithering through the night like an icy wind. "I am the darkness made flesh, the unending hunger. You are but fleeting embers in my eternal shadow." Mara took a step forward, her knees shaking but her determination unbroken. "You were bound once before," she said, her voice wavering but clear. "And tonight we'll send you back to hell." The vampire laughed, a cold, mirthless sound. "You'll try, and you will fail." The battle began in earnest. The vampire moved with inhuman speed, its right hand slashing through the air, leaving trails of dark energy in its wake. Father Donahue lunged forward, brandishing the crucifix, its blessed surface glowing faintly in the vampire's presence. The creature recoiled slightly, hissing, but it quickly recovered. With a flick of its hand, it sent the priest sprawling to the ground, gasping as invisible claws raked across his chest. Mara threw the vial of holy water, and it shattered against the vampire's chest. Steam rose where the water struck, and the creature shrieked in pain, its once imposing figure momentarily faltering. "Now, Father!" Mara shouted. Father Donahue struggled to his feet, blood dripping from his wounds. He swung the crucifix in a wide arc, forcing the vampire to retreat a step. Mara lunged with the dagger, aiming for the creature's wrist. But the vampire was too fast. It caught her by the throat with its left hand, lifting her effortlessly off the ground. "You are brave," it said, its lips curling into a mockery of a smile. But bravery is no shield against death. Mara clawed at its grip, her vision darkening. In a desperate act, she drove the dagger into the vampire's arm. The creature howled, dropping her to the ground. Father Donahue took advantage of the distraction, grabbing a torch lit by the consecrated fire. He thrust it toward the vampire's face. The flames licked at its skin, and the vampire staggered back, its screams reverberating through the churchyard. The thralls pressed closer, their blank eyes fixed on Mara and Father Donahue. One of them, a young boy no older than 12, lunged at Mara. She froze, unable to reconcile the innocent face with the monstrous force driving it. Father Donahue shoved her aside and took the brunt of the attack, the boy's small hands twisting with unnatural strength as they clawed at his neck. "Run, Mara!" the priest choked out, struggling against the thrall. "No!" she screamed, slashing at the boy with the dagger. The silver blade tore through his flesh, and he crumpled to the ground, lifeless once more. The vampire, recovering from the holy fire's assault, extended its right hand. Shadows erupted from the ground, wrapping around Mara's legs like tendrils, pulling her toward the creature. "You will not escape me," it hissed. Mara fought against the tendrils, her screams drowned out by the cacophony of wailing thralls and the vampire's sinister laughter. Father Donahue, bleeding and broken, dragged himself toward the fire. He whispered a final prayer, dipping his hand into the consecrated flames despite the searing pain. With the last of his strength, he flung the flaming torch toward Mara. She caught it, her hands blistering as she held the holy fire aloft. The tendrils recoiled, their shadows dissipating in the golden light. Summoning every ounce of courage, Mara charged at the vampire. It lashed out with its right hand, but she dodged, the torch and dagger working in tandem. She thrust the torch into the creature's chest, its flames searing through flesh and bone. The vampire howled, its body convulsing as the fire spread. With a final, desperate strike, Mara brought the silver dagger down on the vampire's wrist. The blade bit deep, severing its right hand. The creature let out an inhuman scream, the sound splitting the air like thunder. Its body began to disintegrate, collapsing into ash as the severed hand writhed on the ground. Mara snatched it up and hurled it into the consecrated fire. The flames roared, turning a deep crimson as they consumed the hand. The vampire's thralls collapsed instantly, their twisted forms returning to lifeless corpses. The village was silent. The battle was over, but at a terrible cost. Mara knelt beside Father Donahue, cradling his head as he took his final breaths. "You did it," he whispered, his voice weak but filled with peace. "You saved them." Tears streamed down her face. "Not without you." He smiled faintly before his eyes closed, his body finally succumbing to his injuries. In the days that followed, the villagers returned to bury their dead and rebuild. The Carrington estate was burned to the ground, its cursed ruins left to crumble into oblivion. But Mara knew the fight was not truly over. The books recovered from the crypt hinted at something far darker, a force that had created the vampire and might one day rise again. As she stood in the churchyard, the consecrated fire still smoldering at her feet, she made a silent vow. If the darkness ever returned, she would be ready. For now, though, the village slept peacefully, unaware of how close they had come to eternal night. Thank you for watching. Support me with a like and a subscribe. Thank you. See you in another video. Bye.